Hey everyone, and welcome to my podcast. My name is Natalie, and today we'll be taking a deeper look into a few gravestone images. We will also be exploring their proper meaning based on the quotes and text from emblem books written in the 16th and 17th century. Emblem books are a type of book that are filled with pictures with a matching description explaining what the image means. Many of the images that can be found in the emblem books were popular during the 16th, 17th, and 18th century and were compacted down to make a smaller image to put on gravestones. These books were widely known throughout the colonies and Europe. All of the images I have used to support my ideas are located on this website as well if you would like to take a look at them after the podcast. On our different cemetery tours, we saw many different images on gravestones. These images might have been hard to understand since we didn't have the background knowledge of their meaning. During the 16th, 17th, and 18th century, emblem books were used to show and define these images. We can now use these books to fully understand these images like they were supposed to be when they were carved. From the book An Index of Icons in English Emblem Books, 1500 to 1700, the author writes in the introduction, "In England, the vogue for emblems was so strong, Gabriel Harvey protested that the students at Cambridge neglected Aristotle and the classics for emblem books." Now, before we can take a look at the images on gravestones, we need to understand how we perceive images. For this, I will be using an example of an apple. Showing you image 1, you see a picture of a red apple, and you would know this was just a fruit. But if I showed you image 2 and put the apple on a desk, you would most likely think about a teacher or a student giving the apple to their teacher. Then showing you image 3, a picture of an apple with a bite taken out of it in a logo form, you would know that this apple was the computer symbol. Image 4 shows a picture of an apple with two hands, a woman's hand and a man's hand, and you would think about Adam and Eve. In all of these images, you can just see an apple in a different setting, but we are able to interpret what these different apples represent without the full context because of our own background knowledge. When looking at gravestones from the 16th through 18th century, we do not have the background knowledge needed to fully understand what these images mean just by looking at them. The emblem books give us this background knowledge we need. For my podcast, I found 4 images that are popular that have a meaning that is far different from how we would see the image now. These images range from the 16th century to the 18th century when these emblem books were used. I chose this time frame because this is the period we lack the most understanding of background knowledge, and because that's the time frame for the emblem books. 20th and 21st century stones we would better understand since they have much more recent. So, to start things off, I wanted to take a look at one of the most popular images seen in the 17th and 18th century, one we saw a lot when in Eastern Cemetery, the Death's Head image, image number 5. The image shows a skull with a pair of wings, something very unusual to us in this day. To someone from the 17th or 18th century, this image was completely normal to them. Today we see people with skull tattoos, skulls on a leather jacket, or skull and crossbones to warn about poison. These images can be intimidating, scary, and creepy. So when we look at Death's Head images, we might assume it's supposed to show death, something that can be scary to people. When looking into the meaning, though, we learn the image isn't supposed to just show death. According to authors Anne and Dikran Tashian, quote, "Indeed, as grim as the Puritans themselves would have wanted the image to be interpreted, the total design is not one of despair." End quote. This image is a smaller, more compact version of a larger image. The original image showed a skeleton representing death trying to snuff out a candle, as seen in image number 6. Father Time is next to the skeleton holding an hourglass and holding him back from snuffing out the candle. The emblem writer Francis Quarles writes, quote, "Great Prince of Darkness, hold thy needless hand," end quote, when talking about time holding back death. The candle represents a human's life, and death is trying to end the life. Father Time's hourglass shows how much time is left until death is allowed to snuff the candle. The image is supposed to show that we all have a predestined time that we will die, and there's nothing we can do about it. The death's head image seen on gravestones is a compacted version of this. The skull represents death, and the wings represent Father Time. On some death's head images, like on image 6, you can see an hourglass appears above the image of the death's head to represent time. Not all of the death's head gravestones have this, though. When these gravestones were seen in the 17th and 18th century, people would have known that this image meant it was just the person's predestined time to die. Nothing scary or intimidating. In fact, the death's head is often found on some children's graves during this time, to make parents feel better knowing it was just their time and nothing could be done about it. Another image seen on gravestones that wasn't as popular as the death's head is the hoop snake image, seen on image 7. This image shows a snake biting its tail. This image to us would look creepy, and for anyone with a snake fear, could be very gross. This image, though, is not made to be a gross and creepy image. The image, according to emblem books, is supposed to make a person from the 17th and 18th century who are viewing the gravestone to think about themselves and if they were ready for death and eternity. In an emblem book by Combe Whittier, we see the quote, "It is a point of great foresight, into ourselves to look aright," end quote. This quote is telling the viewer of the hoop snake image to look at themselves and see if they were prepared for death. The hoop snake was typically paired with images like the death's head to show that it was the person's time to pass. The snake was also used as a warning to the viewer from the deceased. The stone would have shown that the deceased had reached their time, and then to make the viewer from the 17th or 18th century think if they were ready for their predestined time. Without our knowledge from these emblem books, our perspective on this image would not have been correct. In today's world, we recognize a picture of a lamb as an image we would see on a child's grave. This image is popular for children through the 20th century and even now. We even saw lambs on graves in Evergreen Cemetery for children. This was not always the case. In the original emblem books, a lamb was not just for children, and they did not represent a child like they do today. The lamb back in the 17th and 18th century would have been a symbol of Christ and could have been found on a gravestone of any age. In the Old Testament of the Bible, people would sacrifice a lamb to God. Then, during the New Testament, Jesus was symbolized as a sacrificed lamb when he was crucified. In the RB emblem book, the 21st emblem shows a lamb with a child, image number 8. The description says, "So let us make an emblem of ourselves, thereby to take more heed how God is moved towards them, that his long-suffering and his love contemn. For as we somewhat have of every creature, so we in us somewhat of his nature." End quote. This passage is talking about Jesus' long-suffering when he died and his love being the reason why he died. The end of the passage says that we have some of his nature in us, meaning we have some of Christ in us. This is why the lamb shows up on gravestones in the 17th and 18th century. The lamb was used on any gravestone to show the deceased had some nature of Christ and may be put on a religious person's grave. Then, later on, became popular on children's graves. The last image I would like to talk about today is the image of divine love, also known as the winged cherub image. This image was a very popular image to be found on gravestones in the 18th century. The image first became popular in emblem books during the late 17th century, and it can be found in one of the books from Herman Hugo, that was written and published during the 17th century. The image shows a man in bed who is ill and dying. Next to him is a cherub-like angel helping him, seen in image 9. The passage that goes along with this particular image is, quote, "Have mercy upon me, O Lord, for I am weak, O Lord. Heal me, for my bones are vexed." End quote. We can then see gravestones with a cherub figure on it representing this cherub figure in the divine love image. The picture is a more compact image to represent divine love. Many people see the cherub image as the person who has died as an angel. This common mistake shows how people can misunderstand gravestone images and show the importance of understanding the emblem books. Without knowing this background knowledge of the divine love image, we would assume that the cherub was just supposed to be an angel-like figure of the deceased. The use of images from emblem books were very popular in the colonies from the 17th and 18th centuries. The use of these images started to die out after the American Revolution and the rise of the new country. After the Revolution was over, the people of America looked to the Greeks for their government and some architecture. This was the start of the Greek revival period that started in the 1790s. This revival even took form on gravestones. The use of all the images above died out, and new images like urns and weeping willow trees appear. All of these images could have many different meanings if you weren't familiar with the background from the time period. The emblem books give us a good idea of what these images were really supposed to mean to the person who had them carved. I hope you guys learned something and found this podcast interesting. Thanks for listening.